Hi there. Welcome to one more Wednesday Hangout from BDotnet. If you have been a regular, you will know that as part of the BDotnet initiative, the Bangalore.net User Group initiative, we bring in a speaker every Wednesday, 9 p.m. India Standard Time. Then we give you a dose of technology while you may be having your dinner. So, in continuation with that, we will be having today Mr. Goutham Upadhyaya. He's part of Microsoft India, and he's also part of our BDotnet family. So, Gautam works for Microsoft as a premier field engineer. He's a computer science graduate, and then I'll let him explain more about himself. So over to you, Gautam. Stage is yours.
Thanks a lot, Lohit. First of all, I want to thank everyone who is joining in. I really appreciate your time or precious time where you want to spend your time with your family or having dinner or things like that. So you're taking your time out to learn something new or to experiment something with respect to Microsoft technologies. That's awesome. So appreciate your time. All right, so why are we here? In today's talk, we are focusing on developing store application, maybe a Windows Store application for Windows 8 or Windows Phone application for Windows Phone Store or any kind of client application, right? You typically write client applications. Now you can deal with server side of things with the help of Windows Azure. So that is all Windows Azure Mobile Services is all about. So we'll look at that. So before we get started, thought I'll introduce myself. Probably a few of you might know me because I'm a regular speaker. You could have seen me here and there. All right, so my name is Gautam, as Lloyd said. I'm a premier field engineer. So I joined Microsoft 4.5 years back. So I started off with a consulting role in Microsoft, wherein I was helping gold or silver kind of partners in terms of consulting engagement. Right now, I am with Premier Field Engineering team, wherein we help customers to troubleshoot issues or to adopt latest Microsoft technologies or help them in health checks or code reviews and things like that. So that's pretty much what I do in Microsoft. And some of the technologies that I'm passionate or that I'm currently working with Microsoft are Windows 8, Windows Phone app development, HTML5, Silverlight, WPF, just to name a few. All right, so personally, I like traveling, spending time with family and friends. And apart from that, I started off with a hobby as a hobby like photography. All right, so that's little about me and what I do here in Microsoft. Let's get started. So before we get started, just wanted to help you guys understand three principles, WWH principles. Uh, what is mobile services? Why should we even care about mobile services, or why should we use mobile services? Lastly, we'll also see, or I'll also help you understand how we can use mobile services to create applications that can tie up to your server or your backend services can be adopted with the help of Windows Azure. No matter if you're using an Android application, no matter you're using an iPhone application or a Windows Phone application or a desktop applications, you can hook into a service which is hosted there on the cloud and you can access that. So it's all about understanding what mobile services is, how do you adopt it to your existing applications, how do you leverage mobile services as a service, and things like that. All right. So that's kind of outline what is mobile services. So just to highlight some of the things that we will look at, because we only have an hour today. So today we will look at Windows Azure Mobile Services. We'll look at how do you deal with data. This is an important aspect. So you can write client application on an iOS or Android or a Windows Phone or a Windows 8 Store application, right? Now, if you are not hooking up to your data, which is there on the server, it becomes a thin client app, and all your logic or all your data will get saved locally, right, on that particular app. Now, Windows or Microsoft we provide you an option to store your data on the cloud with the help of mobile services. So you can use mobile services to store your data on the Windows uh, data storage, or that's Windows Azure or the cloud, and you can access these data on from any client. It can be an iOS client, or it can be an Android client, or it can be on a Windows phone client, or it can be a plain vanilla HTML5 application. Now, we recently announced that you can hook up to a PhoneGap project, or you can hook up to Xamarin project and things like that. So I'll talk more about how do you hook up applications to your data, which is available on the cloud. So that is one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is how do you use push notification? Now, there might be scenarios where you want to push notifications to the user who are connected to your applications, right? Maybe there is headlines that you want to push to your application if you are planning to write a news app, or maybe if you are planning to write some kind of weather app. Whenever there is change in weather, or whenever you see something happening, you want to push notifications to the client. Now, developing your own push notification mechanism is pretty hectic and pretty time consuming. With the help of Azure Mobile Services, what you can do is you can consume, or you can configure your applications to subscribe to something called as push notifications, and you can push notifications to your client. So that is the second aspect of it, as in why or how we can use mobile services for our application. The third is, let's say you wrote an application which will consuming data from your cloud onto your different applications. Now, how do you protect your data? So we also have authentication services where you can typically hook up to the identity providers like Facebook, Twitter, or Gmail, or Google, or Microsoft Live, or if you have Active Directory users hosted on cloud, you can even hook up their Windows Azure Active Directory. Support is also possible for authenticating your users, for protecting your data. Now, you could also write some kind of scheduling mechanism. Maybe every 15 minutes or every 30 minutes, you want to send updates to the clients that you have on an iOS app or a Android devices, or a Windows phone or Windows Store kind of application. So you can write your scheduling logic either in C# or in JavaScript, whatever you like. You can schedule things with the help of Azure Mobile Services. Lastly, we will also look at some of the diagnostic capabilities that is there in Azure Mobile Services that will help you to keep track of things that is happening with your data, or things that is happening with your service. And also we'll look at some of the stuff that you need to be aware in terms of scaling your application. So as a whole, in this particular Hangout webcast, we'll see end-to-end of mobile services, and we'll see how it can be used or where it can be used and things like that. All right, so coming back to the first question, like what is Windows Azure Mobile Services? Like I said, you might have n number of apps which are connected, like Windows Store apps, iOS apps, Android apps, or Windows 8 apps. Any kind of apps that you have for any kind of devices, like may it be a tablet or a desktop or a phone or a handheld devices. So we do have something called as mobile services. Like I said, what is mobile services? It's a cloud-based service which is hosted in Microsoft Data Center, which is exposed in the form of REST APIs that can be consumed by your devices, obviously by your applications, which is installed on those devices, which can talk to your data that is there in the cloud. You can also write some kind of logic or some kind of code on the server. It's primarily JavaScript code that you can write on your server, or C# code that you can write on your server. We also have support for something called as source control. That's a new feature again in mobile services, where you can hook up your existing data, or you can hook up your existing application to your source control with in a Git repository. You can also write scheduling mechanisms. So primarily, Windows Azure Mobile Services, like I said in the agenda, it is used for storing data in the cloud. It is used for authentication providers. I mean, if you want to hook up, or you want to protect or safeguard your applications or your data, you can hook up to these authentication mechanism. The other main aspect is push notification. Like I said, if you want to have push notification kind of feature, So your application need not be running. You can still push notifications from the server. So user might not be using your application, but you can still push notifications from the server. So there is the Microsoft push notification server that we will be using in Azure Mobile Services to push notifications to the client. All right, so that is Azure Windows Azure Mobile Services. Like I said, we have support for different platforms as a whole. We have support for Windows 8, we have support for iOS, we have support for Windows Phone or Android applications, or HTML5 or plain HTML5 and JavaScript applications. Now, what you can do is you can choose any of the platform that you're comfortable with to write client-side application, but whatever you want to deal with server side, or whatever you want to deal with your cloud data or your cloud services, you can use Windows Azure to hook up and to push data, or to have authentication, or to have push notification, those things that I mentioned some time back. So these are the supported platform that you can use. Now you might ask me, okay, I know that I can write a iOS application or an Android application, or even I can hook up manually and write push notification logic, or connect to your database and things like that in other platform. What is the key scenario in which mobile services is handy now, right? So answer for that is, primary reason why you'll go for Azure Mobile Services: time. You can develop application within like no time. I mean, if you have like 2 or 5 minutes, you can create a table in the cloud, you can push data back to the cloud, or you can have push notification logic. Everything can be done within like no time. So what I'm saying is, if you're planning to have rapid application development, and if you want to have a push notification or authentication or storing data on the cloud, these kind of scenarios, if you have these kind of scenarios, Azure Mobile Services is your friend, and you should definitely try Azure Mobile Services if you are planning to write client-based applications on any platform, right? So if you want to store data on the server and hook up your client devices, Windows Azure Mobile Services is the technology to go with. And to be very honest, it takes around half an hour to 1 hour to hook up your applications onto the cloud and to work with it. So typical CRUD scenarios, we will look at that today, and I'll show you how you can hook up to your cloud-based services and deal with it. All right, so these are the scenarios in which you will have Azure Mobile Services. Now, enough of talking. Let's head back to Visual Studio, or let's head back to Azure Management Portal, and let's see things in action. And then you'll only understand, or you'll also tell that Azure Mobile Services is fantastic, or Azure Mobile Services is awesome in terms of capabilities and functionalities. All right, so let's get back to my desktop and let me spin up an instance of Internet Explorer here. All right, so the first thing that you'll do is you'll go to Microsoft.com Windows Azure, and you log in with your credentials. Oops, let me just hit this again. All right, so first thing, like I said, you need to have Azure Management Portal access. Now, if you don't have MSDN subscription, or if you don't have Bispark program kind of thing, or you can try this for sure with the trial edition. Like, it takes around 90 days. I mean, you can subscribe to 90 days trial, and you can see how you can leverage Windows Azure Mobile Services. So I do have a MSDN subscription account for Windows Azure. So this is Azure Management Portal. So if you hit www.microsoft.com Azure, on the right on the top right pane, you see something called as portal. You need to click on that and give your valid live credentials. If you have MSDN subscription associated with it, it will take you to the management portal. So the current screen that you see here is the management portal that I'm talking about. Now you can create websites, you can create virtual machines, uh, you can create cloud services on Windows, Azure, or on the data center of the Microsoft. But why are we here? We are here for something called as mobile services. So let me just click on the left tab which says mobile services. To get started, what you need to do is just click on mobile services, and once you click there, on the left bottom pane you have something called as new. I hope it's visible. Just need to click on new. It'll select mobile services and you just need to say create. You need to give it a name. Let me just give BDotnet. Let's see if this is available. Brilliant. I think no one has created, or you guys who are from community or Bangalore user BDotnet user community, probably they haven't tried this. So we got this name. Awesome. So what we'll do is we'll give a unique URL. Let's select what is the kind of database that we want to create. I'll just say create new SQL database instance. So the backend data, what we create, it will be in a SQL server. And you need to select which region that you want to host this particular SQL server. So currently, I think nearest data center is East Asia in the options that is given. And you can select what is the back end technology that you'll be using. Now, if you are dealing with a cloud-based application, you can write back-end logic in JavaScript or in .NET. Now, .NET is still in preview phases. Let's go and select JavaScript as of now and hit on next. Now, it'll ask what is the SQL server. I'll just say new SQL server. I'm just gonna say b.net, and I'm gonna give a password. Let's just type the password again. All right, so let this be East Asia, and I'm gonna hit OK. Now what this will do is this will spin up a new Azure mobile service in Microsoft data center. The region that we selected is East Asia. So this will go ahead and create a service that is exposed as a REST service for your client applications to work with. All right, so it generally takes a minute because it will go spin up a new virtual machine and do all the necessary stuff that this particular mobile services has to do. So let's just give it a minute to get created. So once it gets created, it'll put a tick mark next to it and it'll say status as ready. So right now, if you see, it says creating, which means that it's creating this mobile services in East Asia. So once it is done, you'll also have something called as the URL. Now, if you see, I have my PFE test, which is already created. So if I click on the URL, which is there, it will take me to the URL of that particular site, which tells that it's up and running, right? So similarly, you'll get for the B.NET, if it is up and running, there you go. We have a status called ready. Now you can click on that. So have a look on the URL. It's Azure. It's b.net.azure-mobile.net, right? Now, this is the URL from which you can access things. Let's just click on b.net here. Now, this is the dashboard that you see when you create Azure Mobile Services. So you remember I talked about creating client applications for mobile services. So you can pick and choose any of the platform or any of the technology that you're comfortable with. Now, if you are planning to write a Windows 8 store application, then you have to go ahead and select Windows Store. If you're planning to write a Windows Phone application, then you have to select Windows Phone. Similarly with iOS or Android or HTML, Xamarin, or PhoneGap, whichever you're planning to target. Now, if you're planning to just write a plain HTML, JavaScript, or application, so you can select HTML, JavaScript. It's up to you, whichever you're planning to target. You can pick and choose that particular platform. So we will select Windows Store application. Now, once you select Windows Store application, there is a section called Get Started. Now, what you can do is you can hook up to existing application that is already there, the existing Windows 8 applications that you have already written, or if you are planning to write a new application, so this is the place where you'll start. So you'll say create new application. So once you click on that, it'll give you step-by-step instruction as in what you have to do. First, you have to install Visual Studio 2013 that I've already done. Next is, do you want to create a table? So you'll just go ahead and say if you want to create a table. So for this demo, let me just go ahead and create a table. Now, when I click on this create table, you remember we had selected BDotnet as a SQL server, which is hosted in Southeast Asia. What it will do is it will go ahead and create a table in that particular database called BDotnet, which is hosted in the data center, Microsoft data center in Southeast region. Now, you can pick and choose whichever language that you are targeting. Now, typically, if you're coming from a .NET world, you'll go with C#. If you're coming from a web world, you'll go with JavaScript. So this is for client application. Remember, we are writing client application with for Windows 8. Like I said, you can choose C# or JavaScript, right? So let's select C# and let's say download. Now, the moment you click on download, what it'll do is it'll download a zipped version of your application. Let me just go ahead and save this. Let me just save this on a desktop. Let me open the folder. Let me extract this. Now this is nothing but the same template that you get with Windows 8 app template. Let me just go to the solution here. The only difference is you'll have a secret key that is associated with your mobile services, which will be placed in app.xaml, except that everything is same. All that it will do is it will just hook up a client to your server. I'll just show that in a minute. But this is a plain Windows 8 app in C# that is being written. Now, if you expand main page.xaml, I mean app.xaml and main page.xaml, these are things that you are already familiar with if you are coming from a Windows 8 app development world. Now, this is the only thing that is done by this template. So it will just go ahead and add a client which is called mobile service client. It is like a HTTP client that will get connected to your service, right? And it'll have what is the URL. So you remember we hooked up to this URL and we said it's up and running. This is the endpoint through which we will connect to that particular Windows Azure mobile service. And this is the key that is associated with that particular service. Now, if this key is not matching, then your apps can't communicate, or your app can't communicate to your backend cloud service. So you need to have this in place. Now, you can ask me what if I already have a Windows 8 application? In that scenario, all that you need to do is just copy paste this line of code and place this in your app.xaml, and then from there on you can start building on top of it. All right, so let me just run this. All I've done is I've clicked on create new Windows 8 application and I've pressed F5. So what this will do is this will launch this particular application in a desktop mode. So this will create a Windows 8 application and it'll install this BDotnet application now. So I just wanted to show you what this app is all about. Now this is kind of hello world application that comes out of the box with Azure Mobile Services. You can start building on top of it, or you can hook up to the existing application. So there you go. This application is now deployed and it gives you a couple of things. On the left pane, there is something called as to do item. On the right, you have a refresh button. So typically, uh, what what we can do is we can think of writing CRUD operations to the server, right? So you remember we created a to do item table. So the same to do item table is there on our SQL server, which is exposed in terms of REST API. Now, if I want to push data, right? If you are coming from ADO.NET world, you know how many lines of code that it takes, right? So you need to first create a connection, you have to open that connection, you have to pass the command, you have to execute that command, you have to capture that in the form of reader or a data set and close the connection, things like that, right? So it is like 8 to 10 lines of code that you have to write. With entity framework, things got easy. But here, let's say I want to push some to do items data on my service. I'll just show you here. Let's say test one. So I'll just push few records. Now all this data that I'm saving, it is actually hitting my cloud database and it's storing that data back in my cloud storage. So if you want to see that, let me stop this. Let me just go to Azure Mobile Services portal. There is a tab called data. You can click on the data tab and you can select that to do table. So once you click on the to do table, now these are the data that we pushed from the client app. I don't know how many of you saw this, but we entered test one, we entered test two, that got saved in the table that is there on the Microsoft data center. Now these values got propagated from your client app and it got stored in a database, in a SQL Server database, which is hosted in a Microsoft data center. Now, you can ask me how difficult, what is that I need to know in order to push data from a client app to your server app. Now, the thing is, as a developer, you just need to know to use Visual Studio and you just need to know how to use IntelliSense. That's all it takes to you to learn how to push data to mobile services. Now, the reason why I'm saying that is, let me just go to Visual Studio. So if you remember, I'll just open the app again. We had a save button, right? Let me just enter test 3 here. Oops. Let me just rerun this. So I'm just gonna say test 3 and I'm gonna hit save. What is happening is whatever I've entered is again, it is pushed to the SQL server, which is hosted in Microsoft Data Center, and it is saved. So I have a save button here in my app. Now let's see what we should do in order to consume or in order to push data to the service. Now this is the main page.xaml where we have those save buttons, those refresh buttons and things like that. All that I'm doing in the save, there is a button called save, which is hooked up to insert to do data, which will take this particular item. There is this method called insert async. Now you remember I told you need to know IntelliSense and Visual Studio. This is all you need to know. So once you have a to-do table, I mean, so let me just walk you through the code as in what is being done. I hope you guys remember this this line of code where we created a mobile service client, or the template gave us the mobile service client. So we use that client and we'll say what is that we want to work with. So app.mobileservice is the variable that acts like a client. That is what we declared in the app.xaml. Dot get table will get the table that is associated with it. Now we created a to-do item table in the portal, right? So it'll go ahead and create this to-do item table. Once it creates that table, if you want to push data to it, you'll just say to-do table dot insert async. Now if you want to delete something, just press delete async. I mean, just type D and IntelliSense will give you. So it is as easy as that. Now, if you want to update a database, it is either insert or update. If you want to delete, it's delete, things like that. So CRUD operation is made as easy as that. All that you need to remember is just to use these extension methods to get the data back from the mobile services. So if you want to get the data back, the syntax pretty much the same. You would have been familiar with the link syntax, right? From p where something something, things like that. So if you say to do table dot where, you just pass the condition and it will get return back the data. Now what is happening behind the scene is this particular syntax is firing REST based APIs to fetch data back to your Windows 8 application. Now it's the same thing for Windows Phone. It's little different in HTML5 world or HTML5 JavaScript world. There you'll create a HTTP client and then invoke that REST API. So you can invoke REST API and consume data directly. Now, if you want to see the data in the URL itself, so b.net.azure.mobile, right, is the uh, web URL or the endpoint that I talked about. So if you can just say that URL slash tables slash whatever table that you created. In my case, it is to do item. If you hit enter, now it will return back a set of JSON result. Now you can open this JSON result. It will be same thing what we are seeing there, test1, test2, test3, right? So it is being exposed in the form of REST API. Now, if you know how to invoke REST APIs, I mean, it may be put, post, delete kind of scenarios. You just need to know the URL and pass the appropriate HTTP verb type. Now, typically we are firing a GET request here. If you want to do a post, all that you need to do is specify the method type equals post and then pass that you want to update to the database. So that is if you're writing or if you're planning to write a HTML5 a JavaScript based application. All right, so that does in short what Windows Azure Mobile Services is in terms of writing a back end or creating a data on the cloud. So let's move on. Now, how much time it took for us to create a database or create a SQL server on the cloud and consume it from a Windows 8 app? It took hardly few minutes, right? The same thing for iOS app or same thing for Android app or same story for HTML5 JavaScript app. It takes hardly few minutes to create a backend service that can be consumed from mobile applications or client devices, and you can work with it. So it is again typically recommended in the scenarios where you want to save your data on the cloud and multiple clients want to access that cloud-based data. So that is mobile service and what we can do. Moving on, like I said, it's a structured storage with the help of SQL that is there on the cloud. And we also have options to manage this data in the form of portal, or you can use SQL Management Studio to connect to the SQL Server, or I showed you REST API, right? Wherein you fire a URL, you use tools like Fiddler or through JavaScript, you pass the data, you can work with it. So these are the different options in which you can play with the data. And you can write scripts for your operations on your database. You can have something called as dynamic schema on and off. I don't know whether you guys know what is dynamic schema. I'll just take a minute to explain this. Now you have this particular database, right, with fields like ID and text and complete. Now these are the three fields that is there in my application here. Now if you go to to-do item, that's a class with JSON properties called text complete. Now let's say if you want to add a couple of more fields here. Let's say I want to add address. I want to add one more field. Let's say Let's name it as what is some other name? Okay, let's keep it as test. Okay, and let's give it a property name. Okay, now these are some of the other fields that I created. I mean, other fields in the class. Now, my database schema, if you remember, it has got three fields: ID, text, and complete. Right? Now, what we did is we created a couple of more fields called address and test. Now, if I run this application now, whenever you invoke a insert command, oops, I created. Whenever you invoke, let me just type insert async. So whenever you insert something, now this is nothing but its schema is, I mean, it's of the type to-do item entity. Now that to-do item entity has got these fields, which is different from the schema which we already have. So what it will do is, if you are enabling schema, it'll update the newly added fields in the form of entities, and it'll push this data back into your SQL Server. So your SQL Server, you need not go ahead and add tables or add columns for the existing table. You just need to add properties here. It'll automatically change the schema and it'll add those fields. Now, if I run this, provided you specify that schema enabled equals on, then only it will do that. So let me just run this again. Oops. Let me just stop this and rerun this. Looks like there's some exception. Let's see what it says. Okay, so looks like there is a name conflict. Let me just stop this. Oops, I thought I changed this. Let me just change this to address. Let me just run this again. Okay, so let me go ahead and add. Let me run this again. Okay, so let's add test 5 and hit on save. Now test 5 got added. Now you can go back to management portal. Now if you remember right now, it's got three fields. We added two more fields in our entity. If you refresh, it would have added the address and the test column that we just added from the client or from the application. Now that is an option that you can configure in the Azure management portal, which says enable dynamic schema. So if you say enable dynamic schema is on, then you can change the existing schema of a database. If you say dynamic schema off, which means that you can't change the schema. So that's pretty much as in what you can do with uh, the schema stuff that I wanted to mention here. So you have the option of doing CRUD operations. Remember, how do you do CRUD operations? You just create a mobile client and then create an instance of that particular table with the method called getTable. And if you specify that particular table name, if you say dot, you'll have all the methods like insert async, delete async, update async, and things like that, which will help you to do CRUD operations. So not only that, it also gives us a rich capability for querying stuff, which I'll talk just a minute here. So you can do things like querying by specifying those parameters. I mean, there's something called uh, querying operations that you can do. So if you specify dollar filter and you specify the criteria, it'll invoke this REST service and it'll pass this filter criteria and it'll fetch you back the results that you want. So typically, like I said, every call is a REST-based call. You just specify the verb, and if you want to call this from a JavaScript, you can just use any of the methods that you want to invoke a HTTP based REST based service, and you can get this data back and you can work with it. So if you are doing a get operation and if you want to filter some records, you can use these keywords like filter, order by, skip, select that you are familiar with, and you can invoke these methods if you are working with HTML JavaScript app, or if you are working with .NET or a Windows 8 Windows Phone app. It's just those steps that I just talked about which you have to remember. So these are some of the syntax that you need to remember. So you need not remember. I'll just pass on this deck once we are done with. But these are some of the steps where you can do things like inserting data, updating data, deleting data, and things like that. It's all REST-based call. Your service name .azuremobile.net, VAC table name. That's it. That's pretty much what you have to pass. So ultimately, or what you have to do is you have to create a HTTP client or a mobile service client, and then you have to use them. So that is your server side. How do you do CRUD operations? I just want to show you one more thing, meaning you can embed a server side logic on your database. So that we will see in a minute when we talk about uh, authentication. So let me just move there. Let's talk about authentication, and I'll just show you what you can do with authentication with Azure Mobile Services. Now let's say you are in this particular database. I'll just click on the data tab here. Let's say you are in this particular database. We have added all these fields from our clients, right? So we had a Windows 8 application pushing all this test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from the Windows 8 app. There is a section called permission. Now, right now, what we have done is whoever has got an application key, remember the application key is like 28 character string that I showed you in the app.xaml. So whoever has this cryptographic key, they can push data. But you can change the permission. You can say only authenticated users can save the data. So if I say only authenticated users can save the data, and if I hit OK, so once it is done, what you can do is, I'll just show you. Right now I've changed the permission of this table for only authenticated user. Now if I run this, and if I'm trying to insert a value, it won't be happy because I'm not an authenticated user for this particular service. So right now it polls that particular service. It won't find the mobile service authentication key. It'll come back and it'll say unauthorized service request. So right now we don't have an authentication mechanism in place. That is why it comes back and says you're not a valid user to insert to this database. So what we can do is we can write our logic to have the authentication piece in place. So let's go ahead and do that. So in order to do authentication, we just need to hook up our application. I'll just show you. We just need to hook, to the Windows Store. So let's just click on Store and say Reserve App. So remember, we are trying to add authentication for our app. I'm just gonna say BDotnet Mobile Service and say Reserve App Name. I hope that app won't be present. That's not being used by anyone. Cool. So that's not used. I'm gonna click on Save. Now what I'll do is I will associate this particular application I'll associate this app on the store. I'll just hit next. Hit next. So there is this BDotnet MS that I just created. I'll hit on next and say associate. So right now what I'm doing is I'm associating my app with the store. Now once that is done, there is this section which says how to add authentication. I just need to register my application with the live credentials. So I'm just gonna use that. So let me just click on this. So I'm gonna associate Microsoft account for authentication piece. Okay. So let me just so I'm gonna click on my application page. So this is the app that we just created. Now we need to add the URL for this application. So let me just go ahead and change that in the API settings. Just need to specify this guy. This is the redirect URL. Just need to say login vac Microsoft. And is this mobile or desktop app? Answer is yes. So select that and click on save. So once this is done, we need to go to app settings. I mean, this is just the steps. You can just find this in the documentation. Just go to the portal back, click on data, or click on identity, because we are planning to write authentication logic for our app. So whatever client ID is there here, just go ahead and paste here the secret key. This is the secret key, the package SSID. This is the package SID. Just copy that, paste it back here. Finally, click on save. Now, same set of steps for Facebook, for Twitter, or for any other authentication providers. Just go ahead and click on save. Looks like there is one extra space here. Let me just delete that. Click on save. So it will say, do you want to change this? I'll say go ahead and say yes. Now once that is done, I just need to add these two lines of code in my application. So I'll just go to main page.xaml. I'll add the reference to windows.ui.popup, and I'm gonna add this line of code. I'm gonna add a method which will do the authentication. So I'll specify what is the authentication mechanism. In this case, we are doing a Microsoft account authentication, and whenever I'm doing an insert, I'll just call that particular method, which is authenticate. This method, authenticate async method, and that's it. So if I run this application again, it'll first, I have not given any condition for get operation, so it doesn't read authentication. So it'll get all the records. Now, if I want to save, let's say test 7, I click on save. Now it knows that it should require authentication from Microsoft credentials. So it'll come here and it'll ask what is the Microsoft live credentials that you want to use. So just specify whatever credentials you have. In this case, I'm using my Outlook credentials. And I'm going to say sign in. So it it'll hit Microsoft server for live credentials. It'll pass the authentication token back from the live application to our application, and after which you can work with your application. So right now I was able to successfully insert data because I was a valid user for live credentials. So likewise, you can hook up to Facebook account or Google account or any account or Twitter account or Azure Active Directory users and things like that. So you can have authentication for your applications with the help of Azure Mobile Services. So same stuff, if you want to implement authentication for Facebook or Twitter, it just takes 5-10 minutes. Just go ahead and get the authentic application ID and then put it back in the Azure management portal. You should be able to add authentication to your application. Now, how do you deal with push notification? Push notification also same set of steps. Just go ahead and register your application with the push notification service, and then you'll be able to add push notification. So I don't think I have time to show that, but what I can definitely do is I can open an application which is already done. Let me just open Visual Studio here. BDotnet. I just wanted to show how do you do push notification. It's again 2-3 lines of code that we have to write and associate our application with the push notification service. I'll just show you those steps, and I think later, if you're interested, you just need to follow the syntax. So there is this my PFE test which I've already created. Now in the data tab, if you remember, I talked about something called as scripts. What you can do is you can write some scripts on the server, right? And whenever you do a insert operation or a delete operation or a CRUD operation, these scripts will get executed. So what here I've done is I've created a service and I'm creating a toast notification from the server, and I'm pushing that notification back to the client which is connected. Now, if I run this application, whenever I insert, what push notification server will do is it will send, oops, let me just test. So if it is up and running, whenever I push data, so if you see there, I got a toast notification now, which means that whenever I push the data, it invoked this particular table and it invoked this particular method, and the script got executed. So it pushed a notification, a toast notification back onto my client. So like this, you can write your own scripts or your own notifications in your application and you can deal with it. So it takes hardly like 5-10 minutes of your time to add push notification. And remember, this is a good stuff for your application because users will love notifications. I mean, they need not open your application, but they'll get notification and that will make users to open or launch your application. So this is something which you have to remember, and it's very easy with my Azure Mobile Services to write push notifications. Capabilities of scheduling stuff, I mean writing scripts on the server, which is again in the same portal. If you see, there is a data tab, there is an API tab, and there is also a scheduler tab. You just need to go ahead and add a scheduler. Let's say you want to add a new script which you want to create. Just you can just go ahead and add whatever scripts you want, and you can tell how much in what duration you want to run this and things like that. So you can write a scheduler which keeps running, and you can every 15 minutes or every 1 hour you can send notifications to the client and things like that. So that does scheduling. Apart from that, you also have diagnostics, meaning you can log things, you can expand the size of VM and things like that with Azure Mobile Services. And when it comes to pricing, you have 10 mobile services instance free. If you want to try this out, please go ahead and try this. And if you want to know how much or what uh, the pricing details in terms of different stuff, there is a pricing calculator which I've attached in this PPT, which I'm going to send this. So you can see what is, if you want a database size of 35 GB, what is the cost? If you are exchanging data in terms of the client and the database, or mobile service server, what is the cost and things like that. So like this, you can calculate what is the pricing associated with mobile services. So to wrap it up, Azure Mobile Services is used for the stuff that I talked about. It's used for storing your data in a central location on the cloud. It is used for adding authentication logic to your application. It is used for pushing notifications onto the client. It is used for writing scheduler logic on the cloud or database. And supportingly, you have scaling options and logging options and whatnot. So that's pretty much what I had for today's talk in terms of mobile services. Any questions? You can put your questions right now, or if you want, you can write to me in an email. That's my email address. So thanks a lot, guys. Uh, Lohit, any questions that you hear from audience here?
We have one question. Question is, can you target to multiple platforms, or do we need to create a separate mobile service for each target platform? I think this is got to
No.
do with when you were selecting the core, the SDK or something. I think
Right. So no,
that's
you the answer is no. You can write one service and then hook up to multiple platforms. You can target multiple platforms.
well, that's all the question we have as of now. So let me see if we'll try to give a minute or so if
Sure.
anybody's gonna throw up any questions.
Sure.
Otherwise, thanks, Gautam. It was a
Yeah.
great session. This gets recorded and then people can see this on demand. So
Sure.
hope people get kind of benefited from your all the knowledge that you have shared with us.
Yeah.
Look forward to having you maybe sometime in the future.
Sure, Lohit.
Till then, thank you very much. And then those of you who are joining us live, thank you very much for your time. Have a good night if you're in India. Otherwise, just come back to next Wednesday hangout that we'll have next week. So thank you all. Bye.
Yeah. Bye. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for joining in. Bye.